Дякую, отець Георгій. I again will speak in English, although I would prefer speaking Ukrainian, but it's not always easy. After 2 days with you, I could probably start speaking, but now I still not have developed the skill. First of all, I would like to say that my interest to the ideology of Kirill Gundyayev is not, first of all, connected with the current war in Ukraine. This interest was developed by me earlier and was connected with a kind of social teaching, social ethos or teaching on the human rights, which Kirill Gundyayev and his theological team were promoting in Russia, in the countries like Belarus, and also wider world, in dialogue with other ecumenical partners. And so for me, it was the question, why Russian Church developed such ideology which is anti-human rights, because I'm a lawyer, I'm human rights activist, and for me it was always very important to have this orthodox theological background for human rights and to foster human rights and not to diminish them, especially in countries, in the post-Soviet countries like my Belarus, where dictatorship suppresses human rights, and it's not only a theoretical question, but it's also a question of human dignity and survival of people under dictatorship. So this is my background and from where I started. And in my master thesis about this Russian concept of human rights, I tried to read works of Kirill Gundyayev from earlier ages and to understand from where it comes, this criticism and this untrust to human rights. So basically here what I present will be connected to this work of mine, and so I will repeat some ideas I developed like around 10 years ago, and so I will start that Kirill Gundyayev, first of all, what we need to know about him, he is a pupil of Nikodim Rotov, and he grew up in a Cold War discourse and patriotism to Soviet Union. So his education, his background was to prepare him to represent Soviet Union in the international arena and to defend the positions of the Soviet Union. But in time when he was prepared to this work, so this Cold War, where Soviet Union is the second world, it was very important for his identity. So this struggle with the first world, with the West, it was not only a cultural struggle, but also ideological struggle against this capitalist, universalist Western world. The main discourse at that time was peace building. So peace talks, Soviet Union background was speaking about peace. And as we can see now, he still uses the same peace talks. Kirill never says against peace. Basically, what he uses is now adaptation of this peace-building agenda of Soviet Union, which also was not about peace, but about promoting the certain positions of the Soviet government. In the same way, now Kirill uses this peace theories to defend the Russian invasion into Ukraine. However, so first of all, he uses this narrative of pacifist narrative, which was very dear to the international Christian community, to the ecumenical community, the idea of the just peace, So he instrumentalizes this and changes completely. So first he uses the sentiments among many Christians in the ecumenical movement, which are for peace. And at the same time, he developed this idea of just peace, but completely intervenes the sense of it, saying that what now Russian troops are doing in Ukraine, it's a building justice. And peace is not enough. We need justice. So through building this justice, the idea of just peace is intervened. Also, he developed a traditional value discourse, and this traditional value discourse is mainly oriented to the Westerners, to the right-winged or traditionalist Christians in the United States, in Europe, and that's why this ideology of cultural wars, so-called cultural wars, gender, LGBT, and so on, is also accepted by many Western Christians. For the non-Western or anti-Western Christians, he continues the same discourse of this Cold War, which is decolonization. And this decolonization narrative, which insists on Western expansionism. So it's the West which is expansionist. It's the West which tries to impose its values, its ideas on the rest of the world, and by now by even by war, by military things, it's a emancipatory war. It's not invasion, it's not imperialism, it's anti-imperialism. In a certain sense, that's how it's inverted, that it's anti-imperialistic war against the West, who tries to impose certain ideas. And these ideas also find a lot of followers in different parts of the world. So this collapse of Soviet Union was a tragedy for Kirill. He always repeats that the Soviet Union was a great country. The only problem in the Soviet Union was the head, the roof. Everything else in this country was great, and we needed to keep this building and only change the roof and add their Orthodox onion dome probably in the Soviet building. That was probably the main tragedy or mainly the core event for Kirill. It was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what is interesting, many thought that with the collapse of Soviet Union, it was the end of the Cold War. So the Cold War finished. And we know that Francis Fukuyama, his work on the end of history, marked this time, saying that the ideas, the Western ideas of human rights, liberal democracy, capitalist free market economy, there is no more alternatives. So after collapse of Soviet Union, no more alternative to this universal concept. So they became really universal. However, in the response to this Fukuyama's idea of the end of history, Samuel Huntington proposed another political theory. So how this global politics, by what is marked in the post-Cold War period, and so that's idea of different civilizations based on cultural identity came in play. And it was in 1993. So the first article was in 1993, The Clash of Civilizations, and it influenced enormously the many, I don't know how it was in Ukraine, but I think in Belarus it also was very popular article, and in Russia especially. So this idea, and what is more important, Hanthingston, he proposed, he said that there are like three main strategies now in relationship with the West. First strategy is rejectionism, which means rejection of both westernization and modernization. Second is reformism, which rejects westernization but adopts modernization, like the Japanese way. And third is Kemalism, so which accepts both westernization and modernization. And finally, the fourth strategy, westernization of elite without modernization of country, like African strategy. And so for Russian elite, political elite, that was also after the collapse of Soviet Union, the idea how to find their ideology in relation to the West came into play. And there were different groups, those who insisted on both westernization and modernization. But finally, the idea of rejecting westernization, but keeping modernization won. So that's basically what Kirill has the same strategy. So modernization, meaning using the technological things, institutions which seem to be Western, modern, but in the same time rejection the Western ideology based on human rights and liberal democracy. And what is interesting that Kirill, first time I meet the reference, so Kirill, he referenced to Hanthingston in 1995. So you can imagine 1993, the article in English in the Foreign Affairs was published, and already in 1995, Kirill Gundyayev at Orthodox consultation of WCC refers to both to Fukuyama's idea on end of history, and he says the following: the main contradiction in the 20th century were of ideology. In the end of 20th century, humanity has overcome ideological confrontation and follows the recent Huntington hypothesis on the clash of civilization, I quote Kirill, which will dominate global politics, and which is not only fundamental source of conflicts, but which bases civilization on its own identity, values coming from religious tradition, questions universality of Western liberal projects, and see other civilizations, including Orthodox, as alternative to the Western one. Kirill states, so what could be the conflicts in the 21st century? Very probable that would be cultural civilizational conflicts, in which on the one hand, it is powerful civilization, which we can call the Western secular one, and among alternative to it, there are other civilizational fields and centers linked to Islam and great Chinese culture. So he put, first time he put the question, where are the Russia and the Orthodox world in general? So for him, this question, where is the Russia in all this interplay of different civilization, was put in this Huntington's perspective. So it's not just the indirect influence, but really he read, or maybe he didn't read, but he heard in some TV program about Fukuyama and Huntington, and he already developed his set of questions. So what we are going to do? So this, and what was very interesting in this first period in the 90s, that Kirill is mainly speaking about Orthodox civilization. So the idea was that Huntington's idea also that Russia as a core country for the Orthodox civilization, for all Orthodox civilization, including Greece, including I don't know, Romania, and so on, all the countries of the Eastern Bloc. So Russia is a core country, but also a part of core countries. Huntington develops the idea of divided countries. So when he made a map, like a good geopolitical guy, we always geopolitics means very often geography, and so in the first article in 1993 he put the line of division between Belarus in the center of Belarus, in the center of Ukraine, showing that the countries are divided between Western civilization and Orthodox civilization. And in 1996, by the way, Belarus he already put completely in the Orthodox civilization for whatever reason. So it's interesting that in Belarus, for example, this Huntington theory was very often playing a very important role in finding identity in between. I don't know how it was in Ukraine. Probably it was also for identity, this dynamic between the Western civilization and the Orthodox civilization was also very strong. But for Belarus, it was also very important, and it had earlier background during the time of national movement in 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, but it was also very different from it. I will also mention that in trying to find this new ideology after the collapse of Soviet Union, Kirill also tried to not only to redevelop, refill all the concepts which were theological concepts like the just peace, for example, but he also refilled the concept of the Russian world. And that comes to more closely to our session. So there were different concepts which included the idea of the spiritual space between Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian people, or they were different. They were very much cultural. They were very much spiritual. They were often based in anti-Soviet sentiments and going back to mythological times of the Holy Rus and so on. So there were these sentiments. There were also an ideology of Западно-Руссизм, what we call West Russianism, developed mainly in the 19th century. But also there were like a whole set of different kind of national ideologies, which I think Kirill just filled with a new content, and his new content he developed through two documents. The document of the basic teachings on basic basics of social doctrine of the Russian Church in 2000, but mainly by the document of 2008 on human rights, on human dignity, freedom, and rights, which was so what I think that modernization without westernization means, you take this Western concept, any kind of Western concept, and you fill it with your own interpretation. That's how it works. You take a concept of human rights and you fill it with your own idea. You take the concept of democracy and you feel it with this idea of sovereign democracy, so-called sovereign democracy, so popular in the Russian political theory. So that's, I think, happened very much with the concept of the Russian world, which were not so much developed, but it took from different sources, and especially some sentiments which were not connected with political, not always connected to political realities, and they were filled with a certain content, which I think is very much, so we need to reconstruct this content and to understand. So in a certain sense, from my point of view, this Russian world at some point became very empty space. It only had sentiments rather than strategies, and the sentiments were instrumentalized and filled to serve a point and not even ideological, not even cultural point, but a point to a political point of defending interests of the Russian Federation in a global sense. In a sense of the relationship in the power relationship in the world, which refers also to the period of the Cold War. So in a certain sense, Russian Federation now is a former Soviet Union, which tries to position itself as a global power and play this role in a global politics.
Thank you. 10 секунд до завершення часу. От вам класична, так сказати, вміння, як там, німецька якість з білоруським акцентом.
З двома «Л».
Да, з двома «Л», да. Я бачу підняту руку. Будь ласка.
Thank you very much indeed, Natalia, for this 2L, for your presentation. I completely agree that Patriarch Kirill is faithful pupil of his tutor, Metropolitan Nicodemus, who said, probably we will live in the time when meeting of Politburo of ЦК КПСС will start with Heavenly Father. In 2009, Patriarch Kirill appeared in Kiev and suggested to Kievites to reconsider their choice in 1991. And he was really in rise. He ran from the Kiev directly to Medvedev and Putin, and discussing the fate of Ukraine with them. But now he is probably, in my view, he is not necessary person in all this Kremlin construction. How you see nowadays position of Kirill in ideology and political structure of contemporary Russia?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I think the role of Kirill is very marginal in politics of contemporary Russia. And even if you look to those liberal critical voices in Russia, which try to find the genesis of the Russian world, they almost avoid to speak about the church and about Kirill himself. They attribute the contemporary Russian world ideology of Putin to different sources, like SMD methodology, for example, Shchedrovitsky's circles, or attribute to different groups, different intellectual circles, but they don't mention Kirill Gundyayev as someone who made the central prize of the Russian world ideology and who gave impulse and gave intellectual impulse towards the development of this. And even if we listen also to what Putin says, the religious part, I mean, not religious in a metaphysical sense, but religious in the sense of a link with church or link with concrete religious tradition, is very small. So it is present, but it has very, very marginal character. So Putin is not based on orthodoxy, and he can easily use any kind of religious identity for justification or ideological basis of his aggression. So I think Kirill, for Kirill, this ideology and contemporary political settings playing enormous role. So in his worldview, politics, it's 95% and religion is 5%. And I noticed that it always was like that. I remember the first visit of Kirill in Minsk. First, you know, hierarch, patriarch comes, people come to listen to him. And then he was speaking about this civilizational dynamic, civilizational spaces, and all the Orthodox people were coming out from his speech and said, "We didn't understand anything. What was it about? We expected to hear about saints, about sex, I don't know, about the usual things you hear from spiritual people, and then you come and you hear political science lecture." So for people, they didn't relate. But otherwise, for the regime of Putin and this ideological part, religion plays only, from my point of view, it plays only decorative role. That's a big disbalance.
Тобто патріарх Кирил скоріше на це звіздоння схожий більше, ніж на аятолу.
Yes, I by the way, in one of my texts, I write several times about this Father Звездоний, which was a really prophetic image. Yes, his Звездоний.
Дякуємо пану Віктору за те, що він так нас надихнув на те саме. І знову, ви не вірте тому, що ви бачите на підписі, бо слово ми йдемо не Варварі Босенко, а Дарії Морозовій.
Дякую, добрий день. Thank you, Natalia. Brilliant presentation. You mentioned that Cyril's main target audience are right-wing conservative American Christians and such conservative people. But here in Europe, we see that it works equally well, this Russian world propaganda, on the radical left wing, on the anarchists who believe that Western society is too much oppressive, and there is beautiful USSR. We see this nostalgia towards USSR that was born in 60s or 70s in the West, maybe back to USSR. These people protest against the war because they are pacifists and they are politically neutral, so they guess that war is something excessive, and so they also eat this propaganda perfectly. How does it happen that Soviet Union becomes a perfect utopia for both radical right wing and radical left wing? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting question. I think I mentioned also that it's already since 50s and 60s strategy to speak with different groups in different language. So you take a group a certain group, and you just sell to the certain group the set of ideas. You pack all ideas in a certain to feed different groups. You put different spices in what you want to feed them with, and in a certain sense, Patriarch Kirill is a liberation theologist. So it's a liberation theology also. That's why, for example, Pope Francis is in such a difficult situation how to interact with Patriarch Kirill, because even if we remember, like when Kirill was still not patriarch but chief of relations, external relations department, he was considered by many as a pro-Western, as liberal, is reformist, and in comparison with a certain other groups of the Russian Church. So that's how, like this discourse of decolonization, for example, it's very, you find it everywhere in all ecumenical pan-Orthodox meetings, how the Soviet Orthodox delegation were defending the rights of nations for emancipation and independence. So it was very strong discourse. So when you speak about this, about Africa, it's okay to speak about cultural, own cultural identity, speaking own language, and so on. When you build this so-called Russian Exarchate, you know that Russian Exarchate, if you read this Metropolitan Leonid, or if you read the ideologies behind the Russian Exarchate, the biggest, one of the biggest narratives behind Russian Exarchate is that poor African people are colonized by Greeks, and we, Russian Exarchate, we try to help to them to emancipate from this colonization and to give new strengths to resist this domination of culture. But if you come to Belarus and Ukraine, for example, you never will see the same discourse is it used in Russian Exarchate. The discourse which is used in WCC and discourse which is used for this transnational conservative alliances is also a certain other discourse, which, but it merges finally, like it's a, how to say it, there is a sun, yeah, and many rays, and different rays, they go through different, like when you have rain, and the sun goes through raindrops, the light becomes as a rainbow. It's the same light of the same sun, but we see it in different colors. So the same, there is some kind of core of ideology of Kirill, and it goes through the rain, and each group sees their own color. And I think that methodologically, and sometimes we start to discuss yellow color of the rainbow as a core, but it's not like this. It's even Russian world, from my perspective, even Russian world ideology is one of the rays of Kirill, not of the Russia of Putin. I will not speak about Putin, but this in Kirill, this is one color of the rainbow directed to the certain groups, to the certain purposes, and to the certain having the certain aims. It can change when the green will be more important. It will also come into play. So that's why I think that it's very flexible complex, and we don't. We should not concentrate in one color, but we should try to see the whole rainbow and the nature of the light of the sun.